time to start. And if you already have a copy of this because either I, someone on TikTok, or another person, a therapist, told you to read this and you haven't, you've just been letting it sit there on the table or on your bookshelf for months like I have, we're going to go through this together. And as a disclaimer, I just want to say I have not read this book yet. I've heard excerpts from it that I know I relate to, and that's why I bought the book. But in these next few videos, because I'm certain I'm not going to be able to read through the whole thing in one sitting, but we're going to go through this as I feel things or remember things. I'm going to just say them. Okay, so we're in for a wild ride because I don't have just one set of experience with emotionally immature parents. I have two. And both sets of parents that I was allotted in this life did not understand me and were committed to misunderstanding me if it fell outside of their line of the idyllic way to be as a human and the idyllic way to live as a God-fearing human, specifically, because both sets of parents were very Christian. So, adult children of emotionally immature parents, how to heal from distant, rejecting, or self-involved parents. This is going to be a wild ride. Now, it has about 200 pages, so that's not a crazy long book, okay? We've read novels and fantasy fiction that's way longer than that. We've read biographies about our faves, way longer than that. So it's not going to be an endless amount of learning and pain, but it is going to, by the end of this, I think we're going to end up being, a lot of growth is probably going to happen. So I just wanted to preface that with that little bit of an intro. And this is written by Lindsay Gibson, the Dr. Lindsay Gibson. I don't know the gender of Lindsay. So. Introduction. I don't really need to read the acknowledgements. Okay. The first line of the introduction is actually pretty decent, so I think I'm going to get into it. So. Here we go. Although we're accustomed to thinking of grown-ups as more mature than their own children, what if some sensitive children come into the world and within a few years are more emotionally mature than their parents who have been around for decades? What happens when these immature parents lack the emotional responsiveness necessary to meet their child's emotional needs? The result is emotional neglect, a phenomenon as real as any physical deprivation. Emotional neglect in childhood leads to a painful emotional loneliness that can have long-term negative impact on a person's choices regarding their relationships and intimate partners. This book describes how emotionally immature parents negatively affect their children, especially children who are emotionally sensitive, and it shows you how to heal yourself from the pain and confusion that come from having a parent or parents who refuse emotional intimacy. Emotionally immature parents fear genuine emotion and pull back from emotional closeness. They use coping mechanisms that resist reality rather than dealing with it. They don't welcome self-reflection, so they rarely accept blame or apologize. Ooh, you know what? Do I have a highlighter? Do I have a freaking highlighter in this house? Anywhere? No? Just a pen? Fine. That is a line that I am going... They don't welcome self-reflection, so they rarely accept blame or apologize. Their immaturity makes them inconsistent and emotionally unreliable, and they're blind to their children's needs once their own agenda comes into play. In this book, you're going to learn that when parents are emotionally immature, their children's emotional needs will almost always lose out to the parents' own survival instincts. Myths and fairy tales have been depicting such parents for centuries. Think of how many fairy tales feature abandoned children. who then must find aid from animals and other helpers because their parents are careless, clueless, or absent. In some stories, the parent character is actually malevolent, and the children must take their survival into their own hands, like me. These stories have been popular for centuries because they touch a common chord: how children must fend for themselves after their parents have neglected or abandoned them. Apparently, immature parents have been a problem since antiquity. And this theme of emotional neglect by self-preoccupied parents can still be found in the most compelling stories of our popular culture. In books, movies, and television, the story of emotionally immature parents and the effects they have on their children's lives makes for a rich subject, full of lots of conflict that the kids then have to resolve, like the Winchesters in Supernatural. In some stories, this parent-child dynamic is the main focus. In others, it might be depicted in the backstory of a character. As you learn more about emotional immaturity in this book, you may be reminded of famous characters in drama and literature, not to mention the daily news. Knowing about differences in emotional maturity gives you a way of understanding why you can feel so emotionally lonely in spite of other people's claims of love and kinship. I hope that what you discover here will answer questions you've had for a long time, such as why your interactions with some family members have been so hurtful and frustrating. The good news is that by grasping the concept of emotional immaturity, you can develop more realistic expectations of other people, accepting the level of the relationship possible with them, instead of feeling hurt by their lack of response. Whew, I needed to hear that. I needed to read that. There are definitely so many times that I come across meeting people and I expect them to meet me where I meet people emotionally, and they are not capable of it, and I get so mad and disappointed in them. It's like, I need to just expect what people have to offer is what they're saying they have to offer, and it's not more than that. Okay. Among psychotherapists, it's long been known that emotionally disengaging from toxic parents is the way to restore peace and self-sufficiency. But how does one do this? We do it by understanding that what we are dealing with, what has been missing from the literature on self-involved parents, is a full explanation of why there are limits on their ability to love. This book fills that gap, explaining that these parents basically lack emotional maturity. Once you understand their traits, you'll be able to judge for yourself what level of relationship might be possible or impossible with your parent. Knowing this allows us to return to ourselves, living life from our own deeper nature instead of focusing on parents who just refuse to change. Understanding their emotional immaturity frees us from the emotional loneliness as we realize their neglect wasn't about us, but about them. When we see why they can't be different, we finally can be free of our frustration with them, as well as our doubts about our own lovability. In this book, you're going to find out why one or both of your parents couldn't give you the kind of interactions that would have nourished you emotionally. You'll learn exactly why you may have felt so unseen and unknown by your parents, and why your well-meaning efforts at communication never made things better. In Chapter 1, you'll see why people who grew up with emotionally immature parents often feel emotional loneliness. You'll read the stories of people whose lack of deep emotional connections with their parents affected their adult lives in significant ways. You'll get a detailed picture of what emotional loneliness looks like, and also see how self-awareness can help reverse feelings of isolation. Chapters 2 and 3 will explore the characteristics of emotionally immature parents and the types of relationship problems that they cause. Many of your parents' puzzling behaviors will start to make sense when you see them in the light of emotional immaturity. A checklist is also provided to help you identify your parents' areas of emotional immaturity. When we go through this checklist, I'm going to read all 4 of my parents to filth. When we go through this checklist, we're going to figure out my sets of parents. So you can figure out your stuff, but I'm doing this to process all of the hell that I experienced being raised in general. because being raised was awful for me. I hated being raised. So terrible. Okay. Chapter 4 describes 4 main types of emotionally immature parents and will assist you in identifying which type of parenting you may have had. You'll also learn about the self-defeating habits that children can develop in an effort to adapt to these 4 parent types. In Chapter 5, you'll see how people lose touch with their true selves in order to take on a family role, and how they build up subconscious fantasies about how other people should act in order to heal them from past neglect. You'll learn about the 2 very different types of children likely to emerge from emotionally immature parenting, internalizers and externalizers. This will also shed light on why siblings from the same family can be so vastly different in their style of functioning. In Chapter 6, I described the internalizer personality in greater detail. This is the personality type that is most likely to engage in self-reflection and personal growth, and therefore most likely to be drawn to this book. Internalizers are highly perceptive and sensitive, with strong instincts to engage and connect with other people. You'll see whether this personality type fits you, especially the traits of tending to feel apologetic for needing help, doing most of the emotional work in relationships, and thinking about what other people want first. In Chapter 7, this addresses what happens when old patterns of relating finally break down and people begin to wake up to their unmet needs. This is the point at which people are likely to seek help in psychotherapy. I'll share stories of people who woke up from their self-denying patterns and decided to be different. In this process of admitting the truth to themselves, they regain their ability to trust their instincts and to truly know themselves. That's what the goal of this is, okay? It's not to make you feel worse about how you were brought up. It's not to shed light on why you're never going to have a good relationship with your mom. It is a book to teach you who you are and how you developed the bad habits for your emotional needs because of having emotionally immature parents. So I really want you to take that to heart. I want you to hear me when I say that. This isn't about judging you and the way you were brought up. That will serve no purpose here. This is all education. I'm clearly an internalizer. I deeply seek connection. I deeply seek emotional maturity in others. And I seek it out in everything that I do, including my presence online. I try to make myself as open as humanly possible that I am personally capable of. I don't want to be insanely open, just because the more open you are online, the more those evil little critters will come up through the cracks and shine light on things that you don't really want to lie on. And you know what I mean. If you've been betrayed, you know what I mean. Okay. After reading this book, you'll be able to spot signs of emotional immaturity and understand why you've often felt alone. It'll finally make sense why your attempts at emotional intimacy have failed to create closer relationships with emotionally immature people. You'll learn to manage the overdeveloped empathy that may have held you emotionally hostage to manipulative, non-reciprocal people, like a narcissist. Finally, you'll be able to recognize people who are capable of genuine emotional intimacy and satisfying communication. I'm excited to share my results from years of reading and research on this topic, along with fascinating stories drawn from my work with real clients. I've been on a quest to understand this topic for most of my professional life. It seems to me that a great truth has been hiding in plain sight, obscured by the social stereotypes that puts parents beyond the reach of objectivity. I am so happy to share the discoveries and conclusions that have been confirmed over and over again by the many people that I have worked with. And my hope is to provide relief from the confusion and emotional suffering that emotionally immature parents arouse in their children. If this book helps you understand your emotional loneliness, or helps you create deeper emotional connections and more rewarding intimacy in your life, then I will have accomplished my mission. If it helps you see yourself as a worthy person who is no longer at the mercy of other people's manipulations, I will have done my job. I know you've suspected much of what you are about to read, and I'm here to tell you that you were right all along. And I wish the very best for you. Okay, Lindsay. I like you. Chapter 1. How emotionally immature parents affect their adult children's lives. Emotional loneliness comes from not having enough emotional intimacy with other people. It can start in childhood due to feeling emotionally unseen by self-preoccupied parents, or it can arise in adulthood when an emotional connection is lost. If it's been a lifelong feeling, it points to the likelihood of not being sufficiently emotionally responded to as a child. Growing up in a family with emotionally immature parents is a lonely experience. These parents may look and act perfectly normal, caring for their child's physical health and providing meals and safety. However, if they don't make a solid emotional connection with their child, the child will have a gaping hole where true security might have been. The loneliness of feeling unseen by others is as fundamental a pain as physical injury. Period. So anybody who wants to try to compare and contrast, they're like, well, I got this scar from the time my daddy tried to stab me, or I got my ear chopped off because my mama threw the iron at my head. But you don't have any physical ailments or scars. You just got hit with a phone book because it didn't leave any bruises and your mom ignored you every time you cried. That is just as painful as someone who was physically abused. Okay? Just as painful. You may not have any marks or permanent physical damage from it, but this has become a prison for you. And that's just as awful. That's just as awful. Children have... Wait. Emotional loneliness is a vague and private experience, not easy to see or describe. That's a good line. You might call it a feeling of emptiness or being alone in the world. Some people have called this feeling existential loneliness, but there's nothing existential about it. If you feel it, it came from your family. Children have no way of identifying a lack of emotional intimacy in their relationship with their parents. It isn't a concept that they have. So we aren't born with knowing what emotional intimacy is. Excuse me. It's even less likely that they can understand that their parents are emotionally immature. All they have is a gut feeling of emptiness, which is how a child experiences loneliness. With a mature parent, the child's remedy for loneliness is simply to go to the parent for affectionate connection. But if your parent was scared of deep feelings, you might have been left with an uneasy sense of shame for needing to be comforted. When the children of emotionally immature parents grow up, the core emptiness remains, even if they have a superficially normal adult life. Their loneliness can continue into adulthood if they unwittingly choose relationships that can't give them enough emotional connection. They may go to school, work, get married, raise their own children, but all the while, they'll still be haunted by that core sense of emotional isolation. In this chapter, we're going to look at the people's experiences of emotional loneliness, along with how self-awareness helped them understand what they were missing and how to change. Emotional intimacy. This involves knowing that you have someone you can tell anything to, someone to go to with all of your feelings about anything and everything. So it doesn't have to be your spouse. It could be your best friend. It could be your coworker. It could be your dog. It could whoever you have. It should be a human, but whoever you have that you know that you can tell them anything and they can hang. Whoever you can call that's going to come bury the body and bring you a shovel. That's who you have true emotional intimacy with, where you have no fear of whatever's going to come out of your mouth, that they're going to judge you or make you feel bad for the way that you think and feel. Emotional intimacy is profoundly fulfilling, creating a sense of being seen for who you really are. It can only exist when the other person seeks to know you, not judge you. period. It can only exist when the other person seeks to know you and not judge you. As children, the basis for our security is emotional connection with our caretakers. Emotionally engaged parents make children feel that they always have someone to go to. This kind of security requires genuine emotional interaction with their parents. Parents who are emotionally mature engage in this level of emotional connection almost all the time. They've developed enough self-awareness to be comfortable with their own feelings as well as those of other people. More importantly, they're emotionally attuned to their children, noticing their children's moods and welcoming their feelings with interest. A child feels safe connecting with such a parent, whether seeking comfort or sharing enthusiasm. Mature parents make their children feel that they enjoy engaging with them and that it's fine to talk about emotional issues. These parents have a lively, balanced emotional life and are usually consistent in their attentiveness and their interest toward their own children. They are emotionally dependable. Emotional loneliness. Parents who are emotionally immature, on the other hand, are so self-preoccupied that they don't notice their children's inner experiences. In addition, they discount feelings and they fear emotional intimacy. They're uncomfortable with their own emotional needs and therefore have no idea how to offer support at an emotional level. Such parents may even become nervous and angry if their children get upset, punishing them instead of comforting them. These reactions shut down children's instinctive urge to reach out and close the door to emotional contact. If one or both of your parents were not mature enough to give you emotional support, as a child you would have felt the effects of not having it, but you wouldn't necessarily have known what was wrong. You might have thought that feeling empty and alone was your own private, strange experience, something that made you different from other people. As a child, you had no way of knowing that this hollow feeling is a normal, universal response to lacking adequate human companionship. Emotional loneliness is a term that suggests its own cure, being on the receiving end of another person's sympathetic interest in what you're feeling. This type of loneliness isn't an oddity or a senseless feeling. It's a predictable result of the growing up without sufficient empathy from others. This is not your fault. Okay? Get it out of your head. There's no child that did anything to make their parents be shitty. Your parents chose to be that way because they just didn't know how to be anything better and didn't try to go be anything better. It's not because you weren't worth the work. It's because they just chose not to. They just chose not to. And if you have children and you choose to engage and care, you're a good parent. And that's not a result of them. That's a result of you trying to figure out your own shit so you don't pawn it off on your kids. To round out this description of emotional loneliness, let's look at two people who vividly remember this feeling from childhood and describe it well. This is David's story. Here's how my client David responded when I commented that growing up in his family sounded lonely. He said, "It was incredibly lonely. Like I was utterly isolated. It was a fact of my existence. It just felt normal. In my family, everyone was separate from each other, and we were all emotionally isolated. We lived parallel lives with no points of contact. In high school, I used to get this image of floating in the ocean with no one around me. That's how it felt at home. When I asked him more about the feeling of loneliness, he said, "It was a sensation of emptiness and nothingness. I had no way of knowing that most people didn't feel that way, and that feeling was just daily life for me." Rhonda's story. Rhonda remembered a similar aloneness when she was 7, standing by the moving truck outside her family's old house with her parents and 3 older siblings. Although she was technically with her family, no one was touching her, and she felt totally alone. I was standing there with my family, but nobody had really explained what this move would mean. I felt totally alone trying to figure out what was going on. I was with my family, but I didn't feel like I was with them. I remember feeling exhausted, wondering how I was going to deal with this on my own. I didn't feel like I could ask any questions. They were totally unavailable to me. I was too anxious to share anything with them. I knew it was on me to cope with this alone. The message within emotional loneliness. This kind of emotional pain and loneliness is actually a healthy message. The anxiety felt by David and Rhonda was letting them know that they were in dire need of emotional contact. But because their parents didn't notice how they felt, all they could do was just keep their feelings inside. Fortunately, once you start listening to your emotions instead of shutting them down, they will guide you toward an authentic connection with others. Knowing the cause of your emotional loneliness is the first step toward finding more fulfilling relationships. This isn't just about romantic connection either. It's about friendships, because those are just as vital. Even if you only have 2 friends, you better invest. Doesn't matter how many friends you have, you just need to have them. It's important to have that connection. How children cope with their emotional loneliness. Emotional loneliness is so distressing that a child who experiences it will do whatever is necessary to make some kind of connection with the parent. These children may learn to put other people's needs first as the price of admission to a relationship. Instead of expecting others to provide support or show interest in them, they may take on the role of helping others, convincing everyone that they have few emotional needs of their own. Me. Unfortunately, this tends to create even more loneliness, since covering up your deepest needs prevents genuine connection with others. Okay. Lacking adequate parental support or connection. Many emotionally deprived children are eager to leave their childhood behind. They perceive the best solution is to grow up quickly and become self-sufficient. These children become competent beyond their years, but lonely at their core. They often jump into adulthood prematurely, getting jobs as soon as they can. I got mine when I was 16. Becoming sexually active. Marrying early. I got married outside of high school. Or joining the service, which my ex did. It's as though they're saying, since I'm already taking care of myself, I might as well just go ahead and get the benefits of growing up fast. They look forward to adulthood, believing it offers freedom and a chance to belong. Sadly, in their rush to leave home, they may end up marrying the wrong person, tolerating exploitation, or staying at a job that takes more than it gives. They often settle for emotional loneliness in their relationships because it feels normal to them, like their early home life. Why the past repeats itself. In the lack of emotional connection with emotionally immature parents, let me read that again. If, not in. If the lack of emotional connection with immature parents is so painful, why do so many people end up in similarly frustrating relationships in adulthood? The most primitive parts of our brain tells us that safety lies in familiarity. We gravitate to situations we have had experience with because we know how to deal with them. As children, we don't recognize that our parents' limitations, because seeing our parents as immature or flawed is terrifying. Unfortunately, by denying the painful truth about our parents, we are not able to recognize similarly hurtful people in the future relationships that we develop. Denial makes us repeat the same situation over and over because we never see it coming the next time. Sophie's story illustrates this dynamic very well. Sophie had been dating Jerry for 5 years. She had a great job as a nurse and felt lucky to have a long-term relationship. At 32, she wanted to get married, but Jerry was not in a hurry. In his mind, everything was fine the way it was. He was a fun guy, but he didn't seem to want emotional intimacy and usually closed down when Sophie brought up emotional topics. Sophie was feeling deeply frustrated and sought therapy for help in figuring out what to do. It was a difficult dilemma. She loved Jerry, but she was running out of time to start a family, and she felt guilty and worried that she was asking for too much. One day, Jerry suggested that they go to the restaurant they had gone to on their first date. There was something about the way he asked that made Sophie wonder if he might propose. Sophie barely made it through the dinner, trying to contain her excitement. And sure enough, after dinner, Jerry pulled a small jewelry box out of his jacket pocket. He pushed it across the linen tablecloth, and Sophie could hardly breathe. But when she opened the box, there was no ring, only a small square of paper with a question mark on it. She didn't understand. Jerry grinned and said, "Now you can tell your friends I finally popped the question." "Are you proposing?" she asked in confusion. "No, it's a joke. Get it?" Sophie was shocked, furious, and deeply hurt, as she should be. When she called her mom and told her about the incident, her mom actually sided with Jerry, telling Sophie it was a funny joke and that she shouldn't be mad. I honestly cannot think of a single situation where this would be a good joke in a relationship. It's too deflating and demeaning. But as Sophie recognized later, her mother and Jerry had a lot in common in their insensitivity to people's feelings. Every time Sophie tried to tell them how she felt, she ended up feeling invalidated. In therapy, Sophie began to see the parallels between her mother's lack of empathy and Jerry's emotional insensitivity. She realized that her relationship with Jerry, she just re-entered the emotional loneliness that she felt as a child. She now saw that her frustration with Jerry's emotional unavailability wasn't something new. It was as old as her childhood. And Sophie had felt that the sense of unconnectedness her whole life. Feeling guilty for being unhappy. This is a big one. I have a special place in my heart for people like Sophie, who function so well that other people think they have no problems. In fact, their competence makes it hard for them to take their own pain seriously. I have it all, they're likely to say. I should be happy. Why do I feel so miserable? This is the classic confusion of a person whose physical needs were met in childhood while emotional needs remain unfulfilled. People like Sophie often feel guilty for complaining. Men and women alike will list the things that they have to be thankful for as if their lives were an addition problem whose positive sum means nothing can be wrong. But they can't shake the feeling of being fundamentally alone and lacking the level of emotional intimacy they crave in their closest relationships. Bitch. When I tell you that this is describing me, when I tell you that the amount of people I have met out in the wild who think that I've got it all together because I can make them laugh, I'm not afraid of being embarrassing, and I tell them to just be themselves when they're around me, I cannot tell you how many people who have just, on the basis of getting to know me within the course of an hour, getting to know me, I mask. I'm a masterful masker because I had to be. I remember when I went to esthetician school, okay? The school itself changed owners multiple times. And finally, at the end of it all, a powerful black businesswoman took over my school. Okay? She was fierce. I fucking loved her. I thought she was so cool. But something happened to me while I was in that school. One of the younger people in my class who did not like how boisterous and fun my mask was, because I look like I have it all together. If you don't know me, I look like I have all of my emotional needs met. Every single part about me is done and accounted for. I have it all together. That's what I look like when I'm out in the wild. It's what I look like to you. It's why you seek comfort from me, because I know how to give it. Okay? I know what I'm doing. Years of practice. I took care of my parents, and now I can take care of you. I just can't take care of myself. I'm learning. I'm unlearning, and I'm learning. When I went to this school, and this powerful business-owning Black woman came to me and said, I don't understand why you're crying. You seem like you've had it all together. I just thought you were just some other white person that had everything handed to them. That's what she said to me. When I finally, at the end of the semester that I went to that school and everything was done and I graduated, and I said, I need to have a personal one-on-one meeting with you about the way that I was mistreated at this school so that you can take action to make sure this doesn't happen again to someone else. I told her about my life. I told her about how I was raising myself. I told her about my own personal struggle in my mental health and emotional needs, and how I was seeing a psychiatrist for the first time that year. And someone at that school found out by overhearing me in a conversation and spread throughout the entire school to all of the teachers, including the superintendent, including the owner, that I was crazy and having physical fits in class, that I was lashing out and unstable, and that people needed to watch out for me. Me. When I told this woman who owned the school what had happened to me, and along with pieces, just pieces, fragments of my horrifying childhood, she said, Birdie, I don't think I've ever met somebody that's gone through what you've gone through. I said, I'm surprised at that. I'm very surprised. I think maybe you just might not have been paying attention, because people go through what I've been through a lot. I don't care or need your sympathy. What I want is change. So please note everything that has happened to me while I've been at this school, and take precaution to make sure that other people who are struggling with their mental health don't have to fucking worry about rumors about them going to see a psychiatrist will flood the school and possibly get them kicked out, because I was this close to getting kicked out for working on my mental health and being proud about it. Anyway, people like Sophie often feel guilty about complaining. People alike will list the things that they have to be thankful for as if their life were an addition problem whose positive sum means nothing can be wrong. That is such a profound line, because it's true. When you physically add up all the things about your life that are going according to plan, as far as you know, you got the house, you got the car, you got the dude, you got the kids, you got them in a good school, you got a decent job, you kind of like your boss, you got friends at work, and you got people that you go out with on Fridays. You should feel like you have it all together. And yet, the only thing you can really talk about with Brenda is how her kids are doing and the weather. You can't call your mom for advice, because she's just going to tell you to suck it up and get with it. And you can't call your dad, because he has no emotion, period, and doesn't involve himself in anything that you do. By the time they come to see someone like me, a therapist or a psychiatrist, some of them are either ready to leave their partners or are involved in an affair already that gives them what they need. Others have avoided romantic relationships altogether, and seeing emotional commitment as a trap they prefer to stay out of. Still, others have decided to just stay in their relationship for the sake of their children, and they come to therapy for help in learning how to be less angry and resentful. Few of these people will walk into my office with the thought that their lack of satisfying emotional intimacy started in their childhood. They are usually mystified as to how they ended up in a life that doesn't make them happy. They struggle with feelings of selfishness for wanting something more out of their lives. And as Sophie initially said, relationships are always going to have frustration. It's work, right? She was partly right. Good relationships do take some effort and forbearance. But it should not take work just to be noticed. Making an emotional connection ought to be the easy part. I'm going to say that again. Making an emotional connection ought to be the easiest part of your relationships. Emotional loneliness transcends gender. We love to see it. Although women still outnumber men in seeking psychotherapy, I've worked with many men who have faced the same issue of feeling lonely in their primary relationship. In some ways, it's even more poignant for them because our culture maintains that males have fewer emotional needs. But taking a look at the rates of suicide and violence reveals that that is absolutely not true. Men are much more likely to become violent or succeed at suicide when they feel emotionally anguished. Men who lack emotional intimacy, a sense of belonging, or caring attention can feel as empty as anybody else, though they may resist showing it. Emotional connection is a basic human need, regardless of gender. Period. Children who feel they cannot engage their parents emotionally often try to strengthen their connection by playing whatever role they believe their parents want them to. Although this may win them some fleeting approval, it does not yield genuine emotional closeness. Emotionally disconnected parents don't suddenly develop a capacity for empathy just because their child does something to please them. Okay? People who lacked emotional engagement in their childhood, all people across the board, often can't believe that someone would want to have a relationship with them because of who they are. They believe that if they want closeness, they have to play a role that always puts the other person first. Here's Jake's story. Jake had recently married Kayla, a bubbly woman who made him feel genuinely loved. He was happy when he got married, but now he couldn't shake a feeling of being very down in the dumps. I should be happy, he said. I'm the luckiest guy in the world, and I'm trying hard to be the person that she wants me to be. But I feel like I'm acting. I'm forcing myself to be more upbeat than I really am. And I hate feeling like I'm faking it. I asked Jake who he thought he should be with Kayla. I should be a person who is super happy, like she is. I need to make her feel loved and keep her happy. That's the way it's supposed to be. He looked at me expectantly for confirmation, but when I just waited, he went on. When she comes home from work, I try hard to act really happy and excited, but it's more than I'm really feeling. I'm exhausted. I asked him what he thought would happen if he were to just honestly tell Kayla about the strain that he felt, and he said she would be devastated and furious if I tried to talk to her about it. I told Jake that I believed sharing his honest feelings might have enraged someone in his past, but it didn't sound like how Kayla would respond. It sounded more like what he had told me about his angry mom, who was quick to blow up if people didn't just do what she wanted. That was my fucking mom. Jake's secure relationship with Kayla was tempting him to relax and be himself, but he was sure that his relationship would suffer if he stopped trying so hard. When I informed Jake that maybe this safe new relationship was giving him a chance to finally just be loved for himself, he was uncomfortable with the reference to his emotional needs. He looked embarrassed and said, "When you say it like that, I sound pitiful and needy." During childhood, Jake had gotten the message from his mother that showing any emotional needs meant that he was weak. Further, if he didn't act how she wanted him to, he felt inadequate and unlovable. Jake was eventually able to understand his feelings and become more genuine with Kayla, who totally accepted him. But he was astounded by how much anger toward his mother we'd unearthed. "I can't believe how much I hated her," he said. What Jake didn't realize is that the hate is a normal and involuntary reaction when somebody tries to control you for no good reason. It signals that the person is extinguishing your emotional life force by getting their needs met at your expense. Feeling trapped in taking care of parents. It isn't only in romantic relationships that people may feel a deep emotional loneliness. I've worked with the single people who have similar stories, but their unhappy adult relationships are played out with parents or friends. Typically, their relationships with their parents are so draining that they don't have the emotional energy to pursue romantic relationships, nor do they even want to. Their experiences with their parents have taught them that relationships mean feeling abandoned and burdened at the same time. To these people, relationships are traps. They've already had their hands full with their parent who acts like they own them. Louise, a single school teacher in her late 20s, felt completely dominated by her mother, a gruff ex-policewoman who expected Louise to live with her and take care of her. Her demands were so excessive that Louise started having suicidal thoughts. Louise's therapist told her, in no uncertain terms, that her life depended on getting away from her mother's control. When Louise told her mother that she was leaving, her mother responded with, "That's not going to happen. You'd feel awful about yourself. Besides, I can't get along without you." Fortunately, Louise summoned the strength to establish her own independent life. In the process, she discovered that guilt was a manageable emotion and a small price to pay for her freedom. Here's one: not trusting your own instincts. Emotionally immature parents don't know how to validate their child's feelings or their instincts. Without this validation, children learn to give in to what others seem sure about. As adults, they may deny their instincts to the point where they acquiesce to their relationships that they don't really want. They may then believe it's up to them to make the relationship work. They may rationalize that why they have to try so hard in the relationship as though it were a normal struggle to daily get along with your mate. While effort is needed to maintain communication and connection in a relationship, it should not feel like constant, unrewarding work. The truth is, if both partners fit each other, understand each other's feelings, and are positive and supportive, relationships are primarily pleasurable, not arduous. It isn't asking too much to generally feel happy when you see your partner or look forward to spending time together. When people say you can't have everything, they're really saying they don't have what they need. As a human being, you can trust yourself to know when you're emotionally satisfied. You know when you've been given a full measure. You aren't a bottomless pit of ceaseless demands. You can trust the inner prompts that tell you when something is missing. But if you've been trained to discount your feelings, you'll feel so guilty for complaining if everything looks okay on the outside. If you have a place to live, a regular paycheck, enough food, and a partner or friends, conventional wisdom tells you, how bad can it really be? Many people can readily enumerate all the reasons why they should be satisfied and be shy about admitting that they aren't. They blame themselves for not having the right feelings. Here's Megan's story. Megan broke up with her boyfriend twice before getting pregnant in her first year of college. Although her boyfriend wanted to get married, the relationship did not feel right to her. However, her parents were crazy about her boyfriend, who came from a very wealthy family and pushed her to marry him, especially with a baby on the way. So Megan gave in. Her husband became a successful real estate broker, adding to his appeal for her parents. Years later, with 3 children finally in college, she was ready to end her marriage, but she felt confused and guilty about wanting to leave. In our first session, Megan said, "I don't know how to express myself." Neither her husband nor her parents could understand why she wasn't satisfied with the way things were, and she couldn't find the words to defend her feelings. For every explanation she stumbled through, they countered with several reasons why she was wrong. They discounted her reasons because her complaints were emotional, like not being listened to, having her feelings or requests disregarded, and not having any fun with her husband. She tried to explain to them that she and her husband weren't compatible socially, sexually, or in any of their activities. Megan's real problem wasn't that she didn't know how to express herself, it was that her family just didn't want to hear her. Her husband and her parents weren't trying to understand. They were focused on trying to convince her that she was mistaken. Stop